Okay, my friends, it is Sunday, March 16th, 2025, and I have 5 big stories for you today. So the first is this: there's tens of thousands that stood in silence for 15 minutes, honoring the 15 lives lost in the Novi Sad railway station collapse. And this isn't in Ukraine, this is in Serbia. What started as grief has turned into Serbia's largest student-led protest, demanding accountability, justice, and an end to corruption. Let's look at this. This, wow, that there is some crowd here in Serbia. This is in Belgrade. Now, yeah, that's pretty significant, but let's look at this. So Serbia, over 1 million people, I think that's a very high estimate, are protesting against Vučić dictatorship in the capital Belgrade today, according to some estimates. Serbia's adult population is around 5.8 million. For perspective, that's equivalent to around 46 million Americans taking to the streets. And that's some more video of what was going on here. Now, I don't think that those estimates are right. I don't think it's over 1 million. I think it's something more like a, excuse me, pollen is getting to me, 100,000, maybe upwards of 300,000. But nonetheless, if you take those same estimates, instead of 46 million, that would be 4.6 million, maybe, and the higher estimates like 12 million, something like that in the US. That would be quite a substantial scene if this is what it was. Commenting on the protests, Serbian President Vučić said that the 56 people were injured and 22 detained during the protests. They were injured or arrested on suspicion of vandalism and assault. And then he said, only a dictator would say something like this. He said the protest carried a huge negative energy, anger, and rage directed toward the authorities. Shame on you. That's what a protest is, right? They're upset. The protesters are demanding accountability for the deaths of the 15 people who were killed by the falling rubble. And this was at the train station. The train station had been recently renovated with the involvement of Chinese companies and businesses with alleged ties to the ruling Progressive Party, the SNS. So that's part of the background to that. Now, we're going to move from there and look at not just what's happening in Belgrade, where these people are protesting, but then look at, oh, by the way, and I'm showing you this for a reason, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Jane Kiev talking about Putin's world is imploding in Belgrade. The next stop is Budapest. Well, let's look at Budapest. Well, Budapest today, people are demanding that Prime Minister Orbán resign. So there's a huge protest there as well. And his opposition, Peter Magyar, is saying our spring is here, the spring of the Hungarians, and we, together with, will end Orbán's winter. Okay, so there's a huge protest in Budapest as well. Okay, now, next big story. Voice of America is now off the air. Trump silences the Voice of America. The station goes silent for the first time in 83 years. Over 1,000 journalists, producers, and support staff were forced into leave, according to the Voice of America director. For more than 80 years, Voice of America has reached its audience in 48 languages. In many dictatorships, it was often the only reliable source of information. So what's going on? Is Trump just being a tyrant? Is it a dictatorship? There's more to the story, and I'll try to explain it in context so that you understand how, the full-orbed understanding of this. Okay, so Michael McFaul says you cannot claim to be tough on Xi and the CCP and also support closing Radio Free Asia. I look forward to hearing from Secretary Rubio and Mike Waltz. I can't believe that they support this, because it also is undermining some other, not just Radio Free Europe or Radio Free Asia, the Cuban version. But here's Sputnik talking about Voice of America, foreign agent in Russia, is silenced for the first time in 83 years. More than 1,300 people have been placed on leave after Donald Trump signs an executive order defunding the agency's parent company. Voice of America director has said. Sputnik's very happy about this, as you can imagine. And Michael McFaul, again, he's asking, hey, GOP, grand old party, that's Republicans, China hawks, where are you? I listened for 4 years from you about how Biden was weak on China. So time to speak up about this. Giant Trump must gift to the CCP. Okay, so that's a legitimate question. Here's Representative Don Bacon, who's one of those that's actually speaking up the right direction. Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty play important roles in getting America's story to the rest of the world. We stand for freedom, free markets, rule of law. We want to promote our values. But more to the point, I think this interview, this question and the answer from John Bolton, Trump's former, what Jake Sullivan or Mike Waltz is, that particular position, he broke with him fairly publicly, but he used to work for Trump. I think the answer is correct.
J.D. Vance, who I think have also decided they don't like Zelensky and don't like Ukraine. Vance once said in his 2022 Senate campaign, "I don't care what happens to Ukraine." So it's an uphill struggle, I think.
So I was starting there because there's some background about the disposition toward Ukraine, and we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. But this question is really powerful.
Unfortunately, the Republican Party has championed very strong defensive policies against U.S. adversaries like Russia. So what do you think accounts for this lack of cohesive support in the party for Ukraine?
Yeah, historically, Republicans were the hawks, and it's weird to see what's happened to it.
Well, I think a majority of Republicans actually still support Ukraine, certainly out in the country among Republican voters. And I think quietly behind the scenes, a majority in Congress do too, but they're intimidated by Trump. They're very worried that he will support candidates against them in our primary election to decide who the Republican nominee will be. And in districts that are very safe Republican, doesn't matter who the Democrat nominee is in November. It matters whether the incumbent House member, let's say, can win against a primary opponent. So it's a situation, I think, that's beginning to change. I think more people are beginning to speak out. I think Trump's tariff policies are causing a lot of concern, and I think that adds to concern about his really 180-degree shift toward Russia in the Ukraine situation.
Okay, so yeah, so they are there. People like me are still there, but in the leadership, Trump is really intimidating a lot of those, and they need to really step up. Okay, by the way, I had this great conversation with Joseph Lindsley yesterday. I just put this out today, and we were talking about like the title here is Ukraine's a solution MAGA is looking for but can't see. It's really, really insightful. I would urge you to go see it. You can see it here, or you can see it on Spotify. I keep trying to push people out over here to see things on Spotify for those that are interested in podcasts, because this is fresh ground that we're really not, the Ukraine space UA tubers, we're really not out there in any large measure. I mean, it's me and Times Radio and maybe a couple other little stuff, but that's what's out there. So, okay, now let's wrap this story together. This is the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency website. And here we are with Kari Lake talking about this issue with Radio Free Europe. Here she is. Her title is the Senior Advisor to U.S. Agency for Global Media. That's the substrata over Radio Free Europe. And here's what she's just put out.
Hi, America. I'm here in Washington, D.C. as Senior Advisor at United States Agency for Global Media. I'm working on behalf of you and President Trump and his administration, and I have been on the job for a couple of weeks now, and I'm horrified by some of the things I'm learning about this agency. I'm sitting here on the 13th floor of a shiny, brand new, beautiful skyscraper building that is costing you, the taxpayer, a fortune. The Biden administration folks who were running this agency before, right before they left office, signed a brand new lease for this building, a 15-year lease that's going to cost the taxpayer nearly $250 million. Okay,
so $250 million, and it's over 15 years, so that's about $16 million a year, and that's what she's charged. That's what we're being charged for that.
They already have a building that they're located in that is paid off, that they could have renovated or updated, but they chose instead to get us into a lease that's costing the taxpayer a fortune. I know that every one of you out there is working hard and parting with your tax dollars. You're expecting it to be used wisely, not misused and mismanaged. And I can tell you that this building is a colossal waste of money.
Okay, so she's speaking MAGA language. Again, when I'm talking to JP Lindsley, he's talking about how, like, look, MAGA is angry at the government, and they're doing what they're doing because they're angry at the government. That's what's moving DOGE the direction it's going. So, okay, here's a little bit more of the video.
Take a look at what's in this building. Fancy conference rooms with wall-to-wall windows. There's 26 conference rooms, at least. That's what I've counted in this building. There are 4 bridges to nowhere, massive waterfalls, Italian marble finishes everywhere, leather furnishings, all of this being paid for by the American taxpayer. And it's not the only thing we've seen. We are seeing grants where they've taken the grants and they've changed the contracts just days before we got in here to make it less transparent for us to find out where the money's going and what's happening with these grantees. It was an obvious sign that they wanted to keep us from finding out anything that we could possibly go in and change and make better for the American taxpayer. I want you to know I'm hard at work here in Washington, D.C. I'm working to make sure that we are not being bilked out of our hard-earned dollars. And we're going to make sure we're doing everything we can to cancel contracts that can be canceled, save money, downsize, and make sure there's no misuse of your dollars.
Okay, she's speaking the language of MAGA. And MAGA language is things like the deep state, and that there's this abuse and this fraud, and it's hidden. These, okay, so that's what's going on here. So that it's part of a bigger picture. So now again, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Free Europe are important. Radio Free Asia. We should reform and restructure Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Farda, Radio Free Asia, and not shut them down, says Michael McFaul. And he explains in an article 4 years ago how to do that. And you can do things at the margins that are different. Again, U.S. Agency for Global Media includes all these different networks, but this is how the U.S. government in soft power gets its message out. So if you take this away, it would be like saying, well, we really don't need a press secretary for the president. It would be like the equivalent. This is just an extension of that sort of thing. Can they save money? Probably. Sure. Do they need a fancier building? Maybe not. Maybe. I don't know. But the way that we're approaching it with a sledgehammer is probably not a good thing. But again, you understand that the MAGA DOGE mentality is just destroy, tear this system down. Then you understand it. And again, my conversation with JP, we were talking about this very thing. Okay, Jay in Kyiv, Trump is now also closing the Wilson Center. And his comment was, anything that offers resistance to Russia, authoritarian regimes, or that which is pro-democracy in any way is closing. And Americans still don't get it. Now, I respect Jay in Kyiv. I think he does a lot of really good work. But it's not just this. DOGE is trying to close a lot of other stuff. This happens to be just one of the things along the way. So I wouldn't get alarmed by that kind of thinking. And I get what he's saying in the commentary, but it's more than just that. It's let's close the Department of Education. Let's close that department, this department. Let's shut this whole thing down. Okay. A U.S. State Department plans to also restrict immigrant and tourist visas for citizens of Russia and Belarus. It's not just one way. Affluent business travelers might be allowed to enter, but not people traveling on immigrant or tourist visas. Okay, that's part of the whole same package. I really don't like the idea of this $5 million to buy your U.S. citizenship thing. Something seems deeply unfair about that. And what kind of worst criminal elements might you be getting? You might be getting some good businessmen in that, but you also might be attracting some bad oligarchical type folks as well, and that might not be good. Okay, Secretary of State Rubio is speaking with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, warning that the U.S. won't tolerate continued Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Well, what does that have to do with Ukraine? Why aren't they saying we're not tolerating what you're doing in Ukraine? Like, I'm glad that they're having the discussion. It's okay to be communicating. It's not okay to be communicating and rolling over. And why aren't we talking about what's going on with U.S.-Russia relations in this instead? But okay, that's where we are. Russian propagandists repeat Putin's demand for Ukraine not to be receiving weapons during a possible ceasefire. Of course, the Russians are going to continue to pump their weapons forward. And meanwhile, Macron is stepping up in a big way. He's saying Ukraine is sovereign. If it asks allied forces to be on its territory, it is not for Russia to accept or not, because Putin's upset with the idea that, well, you could have other Europeans in Ukraine. We demand that you don't do that. Well, how do you get to choose that? He says when Russia says if we make a ceasefire, it will be a respite for the Ukrainian army, it says very clearly the fact that it wants to return and go further. In other words, attack other countries. Putin's rejection of any deployment of European forces are an explicit sign of the existential strategic threat that Russia is to France and to the continent. I think he gets it. I mean, he's been at it for about a year, maybe a year and a half now, with like really getting it and stepping up, and good on Macron. Okay, Zelensky is also explaining that Putin has no say in Ukraine's security. This is what Zelensky had to say.
If Putin wants to bring some foreign contingent into Russia's territory, that's his business. But it's not his business to decide anything about Ukraine's and Europe's security.
No, that's right. If you want to bring North Koreans in, that's on you. If you want to, if we want to bring in someone from somewhere else, that's none of your business. And that's right. It seems like a double standard. Meanwhile, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is on the morning show saying things like this.
He's indicated that he accepts the philosophy of President Trump.
He being Putin.
President Trump wants to see an end to this. I think President Putin wants to see an end to this. I think President Zelensky wants to see an end to this. I think that there are specific conditions in the field. There's a 2,000-kilometer border that where there's all kinds of fighting going on currently between Russian and Ukrainian troops. There's a Kursk region that's important to think about here. These are all details that have to get worked out at the table, and all sides, I believe, are committed to doing that.
I'm not sure all sides are committed to doing that. This is President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, saying, I don't think Finland wants a ceasefire. Putin doesn't want peace. His original aim was basically to have Ukraine ceasing to exist. He hasn't changed his aim. This is what all us around the table have to understand. I think that's spot on. And then this is a little bit older. This is Kaya Kallas, and she's talking about this. This was like a year ago she was saying this, but this is the way that the Russians think and behave and negotiate.
Russia is making the demands. Russia is threatening. And now if we think that, oh, let's offer them something, then they actually get something that they didn't have before. And I've quoted this foreign minister, Alexei Gromyko, Soviet time foreign minister, several times, who said about the negotiation tactics of Soviet Union. 3 things. First, demand the maximum. Do not ask, but demand something that has never been yours. Second, present ultimatums, threaten. And third, do not give 1 inch in negotiations, because there will be always people in the West who will offer you something. And then in the end, you will have 1/3 or even 1/2 of something you didn't have before. So we have to keep that in mind all the time.
Yeah. So if you understand that that's the way that they negotiate, you understand what they're doing. You can see it a mile away. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.